Hi there, and welcome to the Play Therapy Circle. Before we begin, please note this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. It does not provide therapeutic advice, and listening does not create a client-therapist relationship. All views expressed are my own, and any case examples shared have been de-identified to protect privacy. If you're seeking personal support, please reach out to a qualified mental health professional in your area. Hi, and welcome to an episode of the Play Therapy Circle. I'm Kylie Ellison, a therapist, clinical supervisor, and play therapy trainer, and I'm so grateful you're here. This podcast is a space for thoughtful, soulful conversations about child-centered therapy, play-based work, and what it means to show up with presence and compassion, both for our clients and for ourselves. Whether you're a seasoned play therapist, a student just starting out, or someone deeply passionate about working with children, you belong here. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Play Therapy Circle podcast. I'm your host, Kylie Ellison, and I am so glad you are here. Happy Thursday, you guys. I'm not even going to pretend like this was done on time. This is literally down to the wire again for another week. So if anyone's wondering how I'm doing, I'm definitely not organized. How is your week going? How are you doing? What's happening in your world? It has been a big week over here, and I just want to acknowledge I just came off a group supervision, and I again was reminded, I've been reminded a few times this week, how important it is that we as therapists are also taking care of ourselves, because we are important in this process as well of delivering play therapy services, but also just really mindful of the different complexities that we work with and support in the families that we connect with, and that relationships are so critical in this space. But in particular, I'm just sending my love to anyone who is working in the space of grief and loss this week. And I guess just more broadly, making sure that you're looking after yourselves. I'm definitely feeling the fatigue of the year, for anyone asking, and I don't know if that's the same for you. I'm recording this on the 6th of August, so we still have months to go, but I'm going to say that I think it's like 140 days till Christmas. So if you are that person that counts down like me, this is exciting. Like September is like the beginning of it, you guys. I can't wait to talk about it. I can't remember if I talked much about it last year, but we have to talk about it this year. Getting our Christmas decorations and all of the things, because, working in this space can be really tricky and really hard and really heavy. And so we need some light. So Christmas is always a good time. Sorry if I've traumatized anyone by mentioning Christmas in August. Apologies. So this episode is now, I'm keeping myself accountable, and I know you guys all will as well, that this is our series for the rest of the year, really going back to those foundational basics so that we've really cemented that before we move into next year. So last week was the start of the foundation series where we talked about personhood of the child, right? But now we're going to go into the playroom. And I really think that the topic of not only just setting up the playroom, so we're going to talk about obviously the different components of a child-centered play therapy playroom. That's obviously the nuts and bolts of what we do, which is really important. But I also think that space is both physical and metaphorical, right? We're talking about how do we facilitate and create a space that is supportive and trusting allowing children to safely be able to explore the room in a way that feels comfortable for them. And that all starts with how we set it up, but then how we as practitioners show up in the room as well. So there's a lot here to cover, and I'm going to try and keep myself to 30 minutes because this is what I'm supposed to be doing. So let's talk about the room as the third therapist. I like this idea. We're going to talk about a few different kind of concepts here when we're talking about the playroom, both physical and metaphorical. And I want to remind everyone of obviously our roots of CCPT in Gary Landreth's writings and teachings here. where he talked about framing the playroom as the child's world in miniatures, which I kind of liked that quote of that. It is a space where we want to not only just literally create their world, but also give them the tools to be able to express themselves. So, what is contained in the room communicates what is possible in the child's inner world. So we want to give them a variety of resources so that they can communicate what they need to. And we know as play therapists, child-centered play therapists, we don't ever assume that we know what that play is going to be. So there's a real importance for us in making sure that we are providing a variety of toys. Gary Landreth always said, though, quality over quantity. So I'm going to reiterate that throughout this presentation because I do think we can get into that habit of trying to collect many different resources in the hopes of creating their inner world or an opportunity for them to explore their inner world. And that can actually be detrimental as well. So we're going to unpack all of that. Not detrimental, but can just be something that we focus too much on when it really, at the end of the day, as Gary Landreth would talk about, it's about that emotional relationship between the therapist and the child, first and foremost. So a room with only nice toys potentially communicates that only nice feelings are welcome here. So I know that I will come across, just online and on social media, certain playroom pictures, and some of them are absolutely gorgeous. And I'm not a proponent for sort of saying, just have a messy room. I'm not saying that either. But there are some rooms that are just so incredibly well thought through that I often wonder, how is that going to go when you have a child that is expressing big feelings around anger and frustration and where there might be mess? How does that play out for the therapist as much as it does for the child? So thinking about the different kind of compositions of those categories of toys we're going to talk about in a minute. But if you only have a room with those kind of nicer type toys and you maybe have a room that lacks aggressive play toys, what potentially does that unconsciously communicate to the child that your anger has nowhere safe to go? Ooh, so making sure that we have some of those aggressive toys where we can offer that redirection, where we can put that act limit setting in safely for the child, but also safely for us. And if you don't necessarily have a room with expressive toys, that creativity and mess are also not welcome here. So when we think about those different categories, and I'm going to unpack it soon in terms of those aggressive, nurturing, and expressive toys, that is potentially what we may be communicating if we don't have those categories kind of ticked off. And here's the great thing about child-centered play therapy, but also the challenge for some practitioners in this space. Because we come from very Rogerian roots, we're talking about an approach where there isn't a one set list. You absolutely tick this off and you are a child-centered play therapist. There is absolutely that opportunity and that freedom for you to be able to select some of those toys that you feel will be helpful and useful in the playroom, meeting those categories. So I know that Gary Landreth has in his textbook, obviously, a list of resources to consider, but it's not exhaustive because every play therapist is going to have something unique to them. It's more around having those categories available. That's the most important part. So every choice about the space communicates something to the child before we've even said a word. So again, I want to make sure that I'm emphasizing the importance of covering off these toys, but also making sure that you as potentially beginning play therapists don't feel this excessive kind of pressure to make sure that it's perfect. That's absolutely not the case. It's really making sure that when you have that room set up, that it communicates a few things to the child. So what we want to communicate to them is, you are welcome here. You are welcome here. So we're going to have toys that are at their level. We want it to be warm and inviting. We don't want it to be clinical and sterile. Like, we want it to be a welcoming space for them. All of you is welcome here. So we're going to have a full range of materials that offer a full range of emotional expression, including those challenging ones like aggression. You are safe here is what we want to communicate by having predictable, consistent, ordered enough toys in the room. So we're not going to be shifting the toys around into different positions in the room each week. They're going to be in the same spots each time so that we offer that predictability and consistency. And also offering to them by saying, you are the expert of what you need. So having accessible choices and toys that are child friendly so that the child can actually access and engage and use those resources. So definitely want to talk through, I guess, those different categories to get you thinking about, okay, if you're a new play therapist, what are the things that I need to consider to set up my room? Or if you're an experienced play therapist, am I ticking off these toys? Am I making sure that I've got enough of those different categories to be able to offer that therapeutic space for the child? So again, quality over quantity, you guys. So we want to talk about nurturing toys first. So we want to, in terms of the purpose of having some of those nurturing toys, we want to allow the child to explore attachment, because we know pretty much in most scenarios, all roads lead back to that attachment, connection, relationship. We want to offer safety. We want them to be able to unpack and make sense of family relationships, of some of those unmet needs in their formative years, what it feels like to be cared for. There's some of the reasons behind why we will have some of those nurturing toys in the room. So what are some of those toys? Again, guys, this is not exhaustive, so take it with a grain of salt. But we want to consider baby dolls. We want to consider maybe a doll's cot or a bed, a blanket. So some of these I have, some of the things I don't. I don't have a cot, but I do definitely have the baby dolls, and I have a blanket. Do you have a bottle? Do you have a doctor's kit? Do you have kitchen items, stuffed toys? Do you have small figurines in your doll's house that represent different roles in the family? And of course, a doll's house as well. So the majority of those things I have. I think it's something to consider. Are these some of the resources that you might be able to include, or do you already have them in the room? What I find fascinating about this, though, and I was only talking to a few clients about this week, is I've been struggling to kind of find a space in my room for my dolls. So I've been keeping them up on the shelf. But what I'm finding when we're talking about these considerations, right, I'm not sure that it's accessible enough for some of the children in my playroom. So I've moved it to a chair. But I find that some children, and I've only got one female child. I have all male clients otherwise. So I'm finding that the clients that I'm working with, and this is not gender specific either, by the way, but just with their presenting issues, they're not necessarily gravitating to the dolls at the moment for different reasons. And so it can be a situation where some of those dolls or those toys or those nurturing toys stay untouched. And that's not a bad thing either. I think that is just where the child is at in their therapy journey. But having them positioned in a way, so I put them on a chair now so it's lower to the ground so the kids can grab them, I think is really important. Because if you're finding that some of those resources are potentially out of reach, or they're away behind like a tent or something, just with kind of how you've laid out the room, making accessible is important. Why does it matter? Because these toys, when we're talking about nurturing toys, help children to process that attachment, helps them to understand those formative years caregiver experiences or current caregiver experiences, what it feels like to be nurtured or neglected, so not having those care needs met, and making sense of different roles in those nurturing relationships. So playing out both being a mum and a baby, for example. So being able to make sense of it is really important. And when we notice, and I guess what to notice when children are using these particular toys, is really around, say, children engaging in role plays with the dolls around feeding, sleeping, protecting, nurturing, making food. All of those things are potentially attachment material. So super important that we have those resources so kids can process that and make sense of it. The aggressive toys, you guys. This is always a bit of a hot topic in child-centered play therapy, because I think there can often be a bit of a variety of content of different toys that people have in their playrooms. I think I've talked about this before, but I have at the moment, I did get a bot bag from a supplier here in Australia. Shout out to Renee. So I got a bot bag from her. I actually prefer the punching bag that I've got from Kmart. So again, I'm talking Australian language, Australian terms here, guys. So I'm not sure what you have in your country. So obviously look to what resources you have in your part of the world. Also, I'm just going to point out, because my neurodiverse brain wants to do this, we are now in 81 countries, you guys. 81 countries. I would love to hit 100. That would be so fun. So cool. So in Australia at Kmart, and actually I'm going to qualify this again to say I'm not sure if it's actually available at the moment, but it has been for a while. I just haven't looked recently. I use the punching bag that has different target numbers on them. So it's blue and red and white for anyone in Australia who's looked at them before. I think it was about $16. Like it really was very inexpensive. But what I find with that punching bag is that children can actually have a full body experience with it because it's very durable. Like it just doesn't seem to evolve, which is amazing. But it is quite a big length, like it's taller than me. And so the kids can kind of roll on it. They can have that sensory input experience. So it's been quite good. But I absolutely always have some form of a punching bag in my room because we need to be able to offer that redirection when we are offering that ACT model to children when they are presenting with those levels of aggression. So if you don't have something to redirect to, that is definitely something to consider. What I found when I was doing travel kits was having like a large teddy bear, is not a huge one, but just a big enough one that again I could redirect to Teddy if I couldn't actually physically have a punching bag in the room. Even to have, swords like foam swords, again from Kmart, you guys, in Australia, swords, having those plastic toy guns. Again, guns is a really big topic, and I'm not going to, I guess, go into it in too much detail today because I feel like that is very culture specific as well in terms of whether you have that in your room or not. But having some aggressive toys like a foam sword, I have plastic handcuffs. I have Nerf guns in my room, so with the Nerf bullets, so in America, dart guns, things like that. Aggressive animals as well. So having some of those bigger animals like lions or sharks or crocodiles that the children can use in the playroom as well. Toy soldiers, all of those things are important. I think with aggressive toys, sometimes parents will ask about it. And again, I want to say that might be culture specific as well. And so, in explaining it to parents, there's a couple of things that we say. Obviously, symbolic aggression in play is developmentally normal and therapeutic, and a way of children overcoming mastery or being able to develop a sense of mastery over some of those big feelings like, safety. But I also say that what is important in the playroom, this is when I'm explaining it to parents, I'll also say it's really important that for me as a practitioner that I am fostering that socially acceptable relationship in the playroom. So I am very firm in my boundaries of not allowing a child to shoot at me because I know that is very important for me to role model that socially acceptable relationship. So I will redirect them to the punching bag, say, so that they can let out those feelings of anger and frustration, but I would never let them replicate any type of play that would not be socially acceptable outside. So that is really important for me to hold those boundaries and explain that to parents. What ultimately often happens if parents make a request to have an aggressive toy removed from the playroom, which over the years of my work, I really probably more encountered in regional and remote communities, interestingly enough, and also in travel kits as opposed to like my actual playroom. And I would have requests. And what I would say to parents is, I fully respect your request for this. What I will say, though, is that even if I take that out, it is very likely that they will find something else in the playroom that may replicate a, say, toy gun and use that instead. So I will absolutely try my best to hold those boundaries, but ultimately, developmentally, children are wanting to process that. And so that makes it a little bit tricky if I'm taking all those resources out. So it's something to consider. And again, it might be a whole podcast episode, you guys, that we'll talk about at another time. But I'm very mindful of allowing children in the playroom to have an alternative because if they don't have an outlet for that aggression, what causes it to leak out sideways in real life? Landreth talks about how children who cannot express aggression in play often express it in their behaviour. So, let me say that again. Landreth says children who cannot express aggression in play often express it in behaviour. So it's really important that we have some of those resources available for kids so that they can do that safely and we can support them. The third category I want to talk about is those expressive toys, creative toys to have in the room. So we want to offer a space in terms of the purpose to allow it to be open-ended and imaginative play and expressive play. We know that that symbolic distancing often feels a lot safer for kids and feels easier for them to process, say, trauma experiences when they've got those expressive resources. So we are a big fan in child-centered play therapy of having those resources available in the playroom. So what belongs in there? So we've got things like a sand tray, so having a small one is really helpful. And again, depending on your framework and theoretical orientation, you may have more specifics to that you want to include in your sand tray in the playroom. So a small contained one is great. Water is something that I have had over the years, but I don't currently have. It's just one of those things sometimes for logistics. Our sink is actually on the complete opposite side of our tenancy, our office space. So it's logistically very difficult. You have to walk through the playroom to get to our sink. So not something that my kids can readily access, but sometimes people have them in the playroom, like it might have a little sink available, which is great. I love that. Play-Doh or clay, amazing. Pens, paper, crayons, watercolors, blocks, magnetic tiles, dress-ups, all of those things that offer creative spaces for children. Why do we do this? So it's just to kind of expand on what I've been saying, that those expressive materials allow the child to create rather than to use, which is that symbolic distancing, right? And integration. So sand and water can be deeply regulating as well. I would argue as well, pens and paper and art, deeply regulating tools for kids. We often find that kids will gravitate when they first come into the playroom using the sand tray, using the sand or using art or using paint as a way of grounding them to the space, helping orientate them to the space. It might be part of their entry ritual that provides that predictability and consistency. So every time I come to the playroom, I start with this resource. So it's very highly beneficial for kids to have it in the playroom. So super, super important. If the room, I want to just reflect on these categories now and summarize. If we have a room that is heavy on nurturing but light on aggressive, the child gets the message that only softness is safe here. If a room is heavy on expressive toys but light on those nurturing, that the child starts to explore and understand that maybe some of those attachment themes don't have an obvious place to land because those resources aren't available around that attachment connection. If there's aggressive toys absent from the playroom, we miss an entire part of their inner world. So making sure that we offer spaces for them to be able to express those different parts of themselves. There's aggressive, the nurturing, and the creative expressive. So what are we looking at here in terms of things we've just talked about that belong? What about things that don't belong in here? So these are according to our child-centered play therapy framework. These are some of the things that would be argued maybe shouldn't necessarily live in our playrooms. Again, I want to be really mindful of obviously our framework, but then acknowledging that every therapist may come with your own orientation in this space of what you prefer to have. So this is just a general guide here, but anything electronic, we really don't have that existing in our playrooms, in our physical playrooms. I know there's obviously pivots to teleplay, and so that's a very different story if you're doing teleplay therapy with a child. But certainly we want to limit, and certainly I haven't ever had electronic or any of those screen-based toys, iPads, phones, those kinds of things in the playroom. Toys with predetermined narratives. So things like licensed character toys. I know that there is definitely different opinions on this in our play therapy community. So everyone is welcome in the play therapy circle, you guys. So we are all absolutely allowed to have our different views on this. I don't have these resources in the room, but that doesn't mean that there couldn't be a clinical rationale for having them in there. Say if you wanted to use them as miniatures in a sand tray experience, say. So definitely having a look at those licensed characters, so Marvel characters, Disney characters, those kind of things. And the original, I guess, rationale to that is that we don't want to predict certain play or essentially determine the play of the child because there is a typical type of play that happens with that character. So Definitely wanting to give the child an opportunity to have some more neutral toys where they can play out their own world as opposed to what is necessarily in Disney or Marvel or others. Board games is one of those ones that I know, was a caveat with Gary Landreth and his work. I do have board games, so I'm going to play devil's advocate here. I do have board games in my room, but I don't require children to follow that structure. So what I very much do is use it again as another resource in the room and allow the child to determine the rules and how they work so that I'm not imposing any expectations on the child, and neither is the resource, neither is the board games. So it's a kind of a different perspective I'm looking at it, sorry. And I find that children get some incredible work done in the space of using board games when I sit very much in my Rogerian CCPT hat and say to the kids, you can decide what the rules are in here. Because again, I'm offering that space for self-direction, self-responsibility, but also allows children to unpack symbolically some deeper play. So I'm playing devil's advocate with that one a little bit. Puzzles and building sets with instructions. Again, I'd probably use it. The only times I can think I've used it is, say, with Lego sets, where I might have a resource in the very beginning that children might want to bring in from home as a transition kind of object. It's not something that I necessarily maintain in my room. But sometimes we have children that are really struggling either to transition in or to stay in the room. It's not necessarily that we then introduce it just for the sake of it. I think it's more if it's something that helps the child be able to kind of distract themselves, to be able to enter the room and to be able to stay in the room, that might be something that you might have. But typically in CCPT, it's not something we would have in the room. So then we're looking at, say, highly gendered, or narrow toys. So we're not going to select toys that are just for boys and just for girls. That doesn't exist in our playrooms either. They are usually gender neutral, which is really important. Toys that fall apart, so anything that's really fragile, we're not going to have in the playroom. We want to make sure that we're ensuring the safety of kids, so really mindful of that as well. And really, the quality of them needs to be durable, but it's not going to be expensive toys that I have in my room. Again, I'm going to reference, guys, being here in Australia, that we use, I often use toys from Kmart, which is, again, a large kind of department store here in Australia. So somewhere where you can find toys that are durable but are not overly expensive is really important. Any toys that require us to demonstrate to them, so if they need to be taught how to use it, where they're kind of losing that autonomy. I can't really think of any in particular that I've had in the space where that's been the case. So really the only ones that I've maybe included on that list that I've just read through is board games. That's probably the only thing that I would argue against our traditional kind of thinking. But I would be keen to hear in the comments toys that you may use or have used in the playroom that I haven't listed, or maybe I have listed that you do. Would love you guys to share in the comments of this episode. Love to hear from you. I want to talk about the room you actually have. Let's talk about this. Many of us are not necessarily working in beautiful playrooms set up in a private practice. Let's be real. So let's talk about, what are those scenarios where we might have need to adapt, I guess. We still bring our CCPT framework, our CCPT skills, we're bringing our CCPT toys, but we maybe have a slightly different space we need to adapt to. So you may have a shared space. You might be in a clinic where there is other multidisciplinary professionals in that building, and you share a room, maybe once or twice a week, whatever that looks like for you. Maybe you're doing outreach into schools, maybe you're doing outreach into homes, maybe you're using community centres, whatever that looks like for you, right? So I think for us as practitioners, a small, well-curated space is better than a poorly curated large space. So even if you have a small space, obviously, again, Gary Landreth talks about in his textbook those measurements of what the actual room space should look like. I definitely argue that, child-centered play therapy lives everywhere. So while it's a guide, I think if you have to use a smaller space, that's okay. We can just adapt that to make sure that you've still got those 3 categories of toys to make sure that children are able to do their work and tell their story even when it's in a smaller premises. So if you have a shared room, obviously having a travel kit is a great idea. And maybe I'll do an episode on just travel kits. That might be a good episode. But having a travel kit is great. You might use a large bag or a caddy or something that, those luggages with wheels on them, whatever kind of works for you to be able to store and transport those toys. But you are able to obviously take those toys with you and set them up in those specific spaces. So if you are looking at the beginning ideas of a travel kit, I want to share, I guess, some suggestions here. But again, you guys, I feel like this should be a whole episode on its own, and I may do that. But some beginning toys to think about for your travel kit. So maybe a small doll's house and family would be great. Maybe even if you can't have a bop bag or a punching bag, just a cushion, like a large cushion that you can redirect to, or like I said, like a bigger size teddy. For years there, when I was doing the beginning of my work, when I was doing travel and outreach services, I had like a mini teddy bear, just a neutral teddy bear that I think I got from like an op shop or something. So like making sure that you're not necessarily going out and paying heaps of money for really beautiful kind of toys is really important. A small sand tray with figurines, that's something that's portable. Some Play-Doh. What I used to do with my travel kits is I would just take like a plastic placemat, and that would be the spot where the kids could use the Play-Doh. So I'd put limits around that if they moved outside, so I could protect the ground of where I was working if it wasn't my office. Pens and paper, some little animals. I would also suggest a cash register. Definitely highly recommend if you've got space to do so. So that you've got a bit of a mix of kind of those nurturing, you've got those creative resources, and you've got the aggressive toys, a little from each of those categories. You don't need to have everything on day one. I think that's really important. As long as the categories are represented, that's a really good start. But it's also important, like as you find things, we obviously want consistency in the playroom. So I don't regularly introduce new toys. And if I ever introduce a new toy, I'm always caveating it for that week of, the clients that I'm seeing, to let them know, hey mate, when we enter the space, just letting you know, I have a new stuffed toy today. Just wanted to let you know. Now we can get started. I want to make sure, especially for my hyper-vigilant, hyper-aware kids, that I've given that caveat. What I think is more important overarchingly, though, is that the space matters, but the intention matters more. So a modest, thoughtful space with genuine warmth beats a beautiful, well-stocked room where we might potentially get distracted as well. So I think bringing yourself to the playroom is absolutely essential. I want to summarize this episode. I know this has been rapid fire, but I really just wanted to provide this information to do this episode to talk about those nuts and bolts. And if you really want me to potentially do just a travel kit episode and doing outreach, child-centered play therapy, I could do that as a separate episode. But just thinking creatively around how you can adapt the space with the resources and the actual layout that you have, but most importantly, really orientating yourself to our CCPT tenets of congruence, empathy, and unconditional positive regard, using your key CCPT skills of tracking, reflecting feelings, limit setting, facilitative responses, and making meaning. That's at the core of what child-centered play therapy is, regardless of where you actually do the play therapy. Obviously, there's lots of considerations around confidentiality of the space and other things, but I just want to emphasize so much of the importance of your presence, of being connected, being congruent, being there with the child, communicating that safe and trusting space, obviously with boundaries and confidentiality, so that the child can make sense of their world and process their experiences. So that ultimately for me is the biggest takeaway from what we're talking about here in the playroom. So this has been a very short, rapid fire episode because we're just talking about what's in a playroom. But please, I would love to hear from you. Feel free to comment in our episode posted on Apple, Spotify, and wherever you get your good podcast. You will find us on social media. We are on Instagram and Facebook. at the Play Therapy Circle podcast. So please, we will post a announcement that this episode is coming up and has been posted. So please jump on there and let us know in the comments what you loved about this episode, what you'd like to hear more about, or any of your own comments or reflections. Next week, we're going to talk about the next core CCPT skill of empathetically responding and returning responsibility, you guys. Building on what we talked about in terms of tracking and reflecting feelings, because we've done those episodes before, I want to kind of go a little bit deeper now with returning responsibility and that empathetic responding. So definitely check us out, as I said, wherever you get good podcasts, on YouTube as well. I forgot to mention that. And if you are interested in connecting with our community, we have our free Play Therapy Circle community. The link will be in our show notes. We have our own supports there around training and supervision for anyone who is interested in reaching out. The links will be in our show notes as well. And more importantly, or most importantly, we are so looking forward to connecting with our Play Therapy Circle podcast community in October in Brisbane for our first ever conference. So again, in the show notes will be all the links if you would like to join us in person in October. We'd love to see you there. So thank you so much for listening. I look forward to seeing you next week. Be kind to yourself and each other, and I will see you again soon. Bye. Thank you so much for being here for another episode of the Play Therapy Circle. If anything resonated with you today, I'd love it if you could follow the podcast, share it with a colleague, or leave a short review. It really helps others find our circle. And if you have a topic or question you'd love me to explore, I'd love to hear from you. This space is for you, and I want it to feel like a conversation. Until next time, take care of yourself, and remember, you belong here.